Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily update for March 29th, 2021. I want to begin with a discussion that took place on March 26th between President Joe Biden and British Prime Minister Boris Johnson to discuss how they can use the upcoming Earth Day Summit, a summit of leaders on climate that will take place April 22nd and 23rd, to promote the idea of a global Green New Deal that precedes the November climate conference, the COP26, that will be taking place in Glasgow, Scotland. According to a report of the discussion between Biden and Johnson, they discussed the importance of developing ambitious climate goals, noting the opportunities provided by the Leaders' Summit on Climate and the UK's G7 presidency. Now, this is something that's just important to realize what's going on here. You have Boris Johnson, who came in pretending to be a Trump-type leader, a national sovereignty figure, going to return the economy to the people. And what we see as soon as Trump is no longer the president, he's embracing Joe Biden. And he's defining his policy as something called Global Britain. Global Britain is a reshaping of the idea of the British Empire. How can the British play a role? And by the British, they mean largely the City of London, backed by the Five Eyes, the intelligence services of Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Britain, and the United States. How can they shape policy to defend the interests of the City of London, which is the empire today? In the United States, it's sometimes called the military-industrial complex, but this is the global cartels that run finance, insurance, raw materials, international trade, the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, and the central banks. They're creating a world that they think will be safe for them, which means no sovereignty is allowed to any nation. Only the control of these international institutions run by the globalists themselves. Now, Johnson has decided he'll take leadership in green policy and also geopolitical strategy. And green policy means the City of London financial bubble. They're going to try and create a green financial bubble. And geopolitics means containing Russia and China. Now, toward that end, he's going to be using on the Green New Deal, the November 1st to 12th COP26 summit in Glasgow. And on geopolitics, there's a June 11th to 13th summit in Cornwall that he'll be hosting. And what he's proposed is to turn this into a D10, the Democratic 10, which would include the G7, but add India, South Korea, and Australia, which are basically, in terms of India and Australia, part of the British Commonwealth. And this is to carry out policies to contain Russia and China. Now, from the US side of this, Biden is pushing a $3 trillion program, which he calls an infrastructure program, but it's primarily going to be green financial bubble. Now, you have to ask yourself, what's driving these globalists of the empire to push for a Green New Deal, which threatens a drastic reduction of human population on the planet, and geopolitical provocations with Russia and China, which could easily lead to a thermonuclear war? Well, there are two major factors involved here. And this is what defines Johnson's policies, not some belief in British national destiny. What it actually represents is a protection of the new British Empire, which is really the old British Empire, just adding social media and social psychology brainwashing to the mix. So the first impetus behind this is the financial system is bankrupt. We've been reporting this for a long time. Lyndon LaRouche is, of course, the leading expert of the last half century in economic forecasting. And what he was reporting after 2008, the crash that, by the way, he forecast, what he said is that the efforts to overcome that were completely fake. They were designed to sustain the speculative bubble system, which was imposed in 1971 when the dollar was taken off gold reserve and a floating exchange rate system was set up, which favored multinational and international institutions over and above sovereign nations determining their economic future. What LaRouche forecast is that they were going to go into bubble economies and they would carry out austerity measures at home, which would be modeled on Hjalmar Schacht's policies, which became the economic policies of Hitler and the concentration camps. And that was done, by the way, on behalf of New York and London cartels. Now, the system is bankrupt. Why? After 2008, instead of putting the bankrupt financial institutions through reorganization, they were bailed out. And instead, people were kicked out of their homes. Businesses were shut down. There was more outsourcing that took place. And so you had quantitative easing and various other forms of easy money, that is, floating funds, fiat money, into the financial system to cover the bad debts, not to encourage investment in new production, but to allow the financial swindlers who created the mortgage-backed security bubble to create new bubbles with new financial instruments. So we have a larger debt bubble today than we had that popped in 2008. What makes it worse is by shutting down the physical economy, which is the real source of wealth, you're keeping credit flowing into speculation, but you're not creating new good jobs. You're not producing increases in productivity because you're wearing down working with the old plant and equipment, which is deeply in debt. They're not about to write that off. And so the productivity drops, the labor force becomes stagnant, you don't have a growth of new people coming in. And then the third factor is there's no investment in infrastructure. Now, add to that their fear of a nationalist response of populations to these policies. People who want better jobs, who want a better future, who don't want to have to pay 3/4 of their salary for a mortgage or for college student loans and things of that sort. So there's a fear of a populist revolt in the transatlantic of the sort that produced Brexit, the Trump election, the yellow vests in France, the farmers who are marching all over Europe against the European Union. And their final fear is that Russia and China, two of the bigger economies and military powers in the world, will not go along with the Great Reset and the Green New Deal. So that's the first factor. Their financial system is bankrupt and they don't have a consensus behind the Great Reset and the Green New Deal. The consensus for the Green New Deal is with the financial community, because their view is there will be a $30 to $50 trillion slush fund, which includes money from governments such as Biden's $3 trillion, from central bank easy money policy, and from the financial sector. But their second impetus for this is their belief, which is rabidly held by the leaders of this, such as people like Klaus Schwab and Mark Carney and Prince Charles and Bill Gates, the Davos crowd. Their belief is that the world is overpopulated, that we have scarce resources, there are limits to growth, and that people who are poor in the major sectors of the world are not going to be able to lift themselves up and have a better standard of living because that would use up scarce resources too quickly. So their greatest fear is that there would be an alliance between the United States, Russia, and China for a new financial system that would invest in production, in the expansion of produced goods, more food production, more funds into research and development. That terrifies them because that means it would compete with the speculative economy, and they have to control governments in order to keep the bubble going. So we've put out a pamphlet, the Schiller Institute and Executive Intelligence Review put out a pamphlet exposing the fraud of the Green New Deal. It's called The Great Leap Backward, and it's available through our website. You can log on there and look up, just type in the search engine, Great Leap Backward. Now, we have to educate people to understand that the whole carbon dioxide question that's been raised is a hoax. It's a fraud. a scientific fraud, as exposed just recently at the Schiller Institute conference by Dr. William Happer, who served for a period of time as Trump's advisor on the National Security Council on climate. So we're talking about a fraudulent policy, fake science, that's being used to reduce the world's population and to force flows of funds into a bankrupt financial system to keep it going over the dead bodies of the majority of the world's population. So that's what Biden and Boris Johnson were actually discussing. What they claimed they were discussing, the new initiatives for a Green New Deal, are really nothing more than a cover for a global genocide policy that must be stopped. So go to our website, order the copy of The Great Leap Backward, and I'll be back with you tomorrow.